Chapter 2. Understanding the Demon of the Mind. Imagine a man named Hank. Hank is a natural-born salesman, good with people, a good judge of character. But Hank is also tortured, and that's not too strong a word for the mental miseries he endures. He spends chunks of time, 15 minutes here, an hour there, sometimes an entire Saturday morning and even longer, brooding. Troubling, jagged thoughts, images, ideas, and feelings pop up unimpeded in his mind like rocks in a river's current as he desperately tries to steady his mental raft. They keep on coming, smashing against his mind over and over while he bravely tries to survive another trip down the relentlessly moving rapids within. Fixed in place by the torrent of his negative thoughts, Hank sits in the easy chair in his living room. Feet on the floor, fingers digging into the arms of his chair, staring out the window at a sunny afternoon. Of course he does see what's actually outside, an elm tree in the foreground, the street beyond, but he can't really take in the view. All he sees is danger and more metaphorical rocks to get past. This horrible ruminative process is as much a routine part of Hank's life as brushing his teeth or commuting to work. Only it lasts longer and it produces only pain. No gain. Now 40 years old, Hank is underachieving at work. Not because he lacks talent, he has talent coming out his ears, as his boss said. But because he just can't get his act together, to quote his exasperated wife. Hank is more exasperated than anyone, which only fuels his incessant self-recrimination. He's tried antidepressants, which did nothing but reduce his libido, diminishing one of the few pleasures in his life. He's tried psychotherapy, which ironically caused him guilt because he felt he was frustrating the psychologist and making the psychologist feel incompetent. "It's not your fault, Doc," he said in their final meeting, the one in which Hank declared himself incurable. "I'm just wired differently. I've got the devil of a dark side. I might as well get used to it." Like many people, Hank experiences excessive worry. But because he also has ADHD, his worry has been magnified. Ironically, for a condition commonly associated with lack of focus, many people with ADHD, or with the vast characteristics, focus on their worry so much that it wears a rut in their thinking. And like a rut in the road, it can be hard to avoid. Fortunately, we now know how these ruts get made and how to steer the mind out of them. New findings. New help. Enter one of our world's greatest triumphs of the past 30 years, advances in brain science. After millennia of moral, it's all a matter of willpower, suck it up. Or philosophical, control what you can, accept what you can't, explanations and remedies for mental anguish. We now live in an era when we can assess the actual substrate in which the action occurs, namely, your brain and its attendant nervous system. We can now measure the many molecules in the brain, the electrical activity, the flow of blood, the differential consumption of glucose, energy, and oxygen, and the actual size of various regions of the brain and correlate the size with the function of that area. We're starting to understand the genetics behind brain function, as well as the epigenetics. The varying impact of environment upon the expression of genes. For example, it is because of epigenetics that you may have been born with genes that predispose you to depression. But because of loving parents and a nurturing school system, those genes never get expressed. You go through life never suffering from depression, even though you carry the genes that might have led you there. On the other hand, if you had unloving parents, if you never received nurturing and positive connections, or, worse, if you suffered trauma and abuse, then if you also inherited the genes that predispose you to depression or other pathology, those genes are far more likely to get expressed. Regardless of the trait, condition, disorder, or disease, nature versus nurture always comes down to both. Good nurture can dramatically reduce the influence of bad nature, bad genes. Unfortunately, the reverse is also true: bad nurture, like cold or distant parents, ongoing conflict, or outright trauma while growing up, can suppress good nature, good genes. The science of epigenetics has helped prove the brain's wondrous ability to change over the course of your lifetime. Called neuroplasticity, this is one of the major discoveries in neuroscience in the past generation. People used to believe that the brain was more or less set by a certain age, let's say 30, and after that the die was cast, the brain was set. This fixed brain notion begot a host of homespun clichés and conventional wisdom to the effect that you simply cannot teach an old dog, or even a middle-aged dog, new tricks. That from age 30 the leopard does not change its spots, that you are who you are and you better get used to it. Because no amount of therapy, life experience, or other magic can make a significant dent in the architecture of your brain or your personality. Except by changing it for the worse, through disease, stroke, cancer, poisons, alcohol, drugs, or dementia. Wrong. As with much homespun wisdom regarding the mind, we now know different. Thanks to the work of many neuroscientists, we know that what you do, who you love, where you live, what you eat, how much you move, what kind of stress you experience, if you have a pet, whether you laugh a lot. All those and a zillion more bits of experience constantly change who you are in subtle ways. Your brain responds to all these cues in turn. Most people do not realize what fantastically great news this is. We can change who we are and where we're headed. It's not easy, but it can be done. And done at any age. You're never too old to find a new life. A new love, a better day. Our brains present us with the opportunity day in and day out. We just have to unwrap the gift. The science of the last 30 years also explains, at least in part, the tension and the contradictions that lie at the core of ADHD and VAST. It explains what's going on in our brains that leads to creativity, entrepreneurialism, and dynamism. But also, at the same time, irrational brooding, worrying, ruminating, and falling prey to self-destructive addictions and compulsions. If Hank had known about all this, he might have been able to circumvent his tortured thoughts. He also could have started to use his talents, empathy, emotional intelligence, and creativity, to excel in his chosen profession. Brain Basics. In Chapter 1 we stressed that ADHD is a syndrome of contradictions and paradoxes. Each negative has a matched positive and vice versa. You can focus, but then not focus, or you're forced into hyperfocus when you don't want to be. We emphasize the inconsistency created by the brain's dueling banjos, so to speak. And how ADHD is never all good or all bad. Now we can explain why this is so. Central to both the gift of creativity and the curse of brooding lie two mindsets we like to call the angel and the demon. These are not at all religious references. We think of them more like the benevolent spirit that whispers encouragement from one shoulder, and the imp on the other who gives terrible advice. The angel bestows the gifts, and the demon casts the curse. With practical tools, you can learn to activate the angel while shutting down the demon, often without medication. To unpack all this, let's begin with some nuts and bolts explanations that apply to everyone. VAST, ADHD. Or neurotypical, as we say in psychiatry. When you are engaged in a task of any kind. From frying an egg to writing an email to digging a hole. Various clumps of neurons, together called a connectome, light up in your brain. We can see this through the exciting new science of fMRI, or functional magnetic resonance imaging. It's like a live, moving X-ray, and it's as close as we now can get to watching thought in motion. The connectome that lights up when you're engaged in a task is called the task-positive network, or TPN. Aptly named. The TPN gets you down to work. You're deliberately doing something and you are intent on it, unaware of much beyond the bounds of what you're doing. In this state, you don't consciously know whether you're happy or not. Which is just as good as being happy, if not better, because you're not wasting any energy in self-assessment. You may become frustrated with what you're doing and have moments of anger or dismay, but if you stay in the task, in the TPN, those moments will pass. And the TPN, buoyant connectome that it is, will carry you along. When you're thinking with the TPN, you're in the angel mindset. But you can also get trapped in the TPN, doing a task from which you cannot disengage. This is the hyperfocus state that people with ADHD can fall into. Far from being helpful, it can keep you stuck in one task, unable to shut down the screen, turn off the TV, or move from one paragraph to the next. This is the often unrecognized downside of focus. Incidentally, the reason that so many people are starting to look and act distracted, as if they all have ADHD or VAST, is that fewer and fewer people are spending time in the task-positive network. They are not spending enough time focusing on a single task. Certainly not long enough to dig a deep enough hole or write an email longer than a sentence or two. Or do more than look at an egg, let alone fry one. Unfortunately, the TPN is akin to a muscle that atrophies when not used. So as we mentally flit around, the TPN weakens and our attention span shortens. When you allow your mind to wander from a task, or when you finish the task, or if you pause too long in anger or dismay while doing the task, the TPN in your brain defaults to a different connectome. Not surprisingly, given that we default to this state, this other connectome is called the default mode network, DMN. The DMN allows for expansive, imaginative, and creative thinking. The back half of the DMN, called the posterior cingulate, facilitates your autobiographic memory, your personal history. This allows you to think back, draw upon, and pick apart the past. The front part, the medial prefrontal cortex, is the opposite. It enables you to look forward and to think about, imagine, and plan for the future. It is in the DMN mode that you can daydream and miss your exit on the highway, or make interesting connections between concepts, helpful when appreciating riddles or jokes or solving crossword puzzles, or coming up with the next big thing. It was surely in the DMN that the wheel was discovered. The DMN and TPN are the yin and yang of your brain. Both help us and hold us back in certain ways. One isn't better than the other. But as helpful as the DMN can be, angelic in its own right, it is also a demon, as its initialism suggests, for the ADHD or vast brain. Because of our capacity for intractable rumination while captive in it. The glitchy switch. For neurotypical people, toggling over to the DMN periodically allows you to get some intellectual rest and relaxation. Daydreaming time, for instance. Which isn't necessarily bad. But highly imaginative, creative people, like those of us who have ADHD or VAST, often get stuck in the DMN, leading to horribly negative, gloomy, and self-critical thoughts like the ones we saw in Hank's experience earlier. While we are all wired to feel fear and imagine disaster far more than to feel comfortable and secure. Along with our five senses, the imagination is our chief evolutionary danger detector. People who have ADHD or VAST are also particularly prone to head toward gloom and doom in their minds. Because they have stored up in their memory banks a lifetime of moments of failure, disappointment, shame, frustration, defeat, and embarrassment. Given a moment to reflect on what's likely to happen next, life has taught people with ADHD to imagine and expect the worst. Too many facts are readily available to support the thesis that, well, life sucks. The cutting-edge work of a neuroscientist and professor at MIT named John Gabrielli points up another reason that people with ADHD or the variable attention stimulus trait are more prone to negativity. I think of the default mode network as our internal self-system, says Gabrielli. It's a bit of a chatterbox. Some chatter is good, some is destructive. To paraphrase Gabrielli, the problem when ADHD enters in is twofold. The first is what's called the anti-correlation property of the two networks. Imagine a seesaw. In a neurotypical brain, when the TPN is turned on and you're on task, the DMN is turned off. But in the ADHD brain, the fMRI shows that when the TPN is turned on, the DMN is turned on as well, trying to muscle its way in and pull you into its grasp, thereby distracting you. In ADHD, therefore, the DMN competes with the TPN, which in most people it does not do. Adding another important spin, Gabrielli says that within the DMN itself, between the front and back regions, the opposite occurs. Typically, people have synchrony in their default mode network. They go up and down together. Not so in the ADHD brain. They are off-kilter, out of sync. That's what's meant by anti-correlation. Instead of working in unison, they work against each other. If that's not complicated enough, Gabrielli explains an even more important issue undermining the ADHD brain. It's how these networks interact, both internally and with each other. Adjusting his glasses, he makes his strongest point. If there is one takeaway in distilling down the complexity of the DMN and the TPN, it boils down to the fact that the toggle switches between them are off in those with ADHD. In other words, in most people the DMN does not slip so easily into the TPN, the gears mesh well and are not glitchy. But in people who have ADHD, the gears get stripped, so to speak. And so you're left with this dangerous/wonderful curse/gift. This is truly a malfunction of the imagination, and it explains the confluence of the creative and depressive we so often see within the same person, even within the same hour. The creative side gains expression and something beautiful takes shape. But then the depressive side carps. That's ugly. You've failed again. The creative side sinks under the weight until its natural resilience and buoyancy, or the glitchy switch, brings it back with a bang. The blessing and the curse vie for top billing. For attention. When the DMN brings lovely images, it is our golden tool. But when it jumps track into the TPN and hijacks consciousness, then the DMN becomes the demon, the seed of misery, the disease of the imagination. Trapped in the past or future in the DMN, you're likely to abandon projects you once started with enthusiasm, make careless mistakes. Or, worse, fall into a state of misery and despair, for no good reason whatsoever. All creative people can recognize only too well the phenomenon of being on a roll, creating, only to have a negative voice trying to interrupt the process. That's the faulty toggle switch allowing the DMN to intrude on the TPN. Being trapped in it is painful, the term tortured artist fits. Indeed, many of our greatest scientists, inventors, performers, and writers have struggled with glitchy connections. Vacillating between creating great works and languishing in despair. Often seeking relief in drugs, alcohol, or self-destructive compulsive activity.